The hearing room was supposed to be another ordinary clash of words, another forgettable moment in Washington's endless theater. But the freeze frame that would replay across America told a different story. Representative James Comer, face red with fury, leaned forward over the microphone, voice cracking as he shouted, "Stop talking." His words weren't just loud, they were dripping with anger, desperation, and the confidence of someone used to silencing others by sheer volume. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't recoil, didn't match fire with fire. Instead, she remained perfectly still, her eyes steady, her posture unbroken. The silence in her composure was louder than his scream. Around her, aides shifted uneasily. Reporters' pens scratched furiously, and the cameras zoomed in, knowing instinctively that this was the shot, the clash that would define not just the hearing, but the narrative far beyond its walls. The chamber itself seemed to split in two. Some smirked, nodding with Comer's outburst, as if dominance was proof of truth. Others gasped, wide-eyed, sensing that something far bigger was unfolding. It wasn't just a congressman shouting at a colleague. It was arrogance demanding submission. It was an attempt to shout dignity into silence, and still, Crockett did not raise her voice. She let his words hang in the air, let the echo of his command expose its own fragility. The calm in her silence wasn't weakness, it was preparation. It was the strength of someone who had endured louder voices, harsher insults, and deeper dismissals her entire life. The moment stretched. Every camera caught Comer's face twisted in rage. Every notebook underlined his command in jagged strokes. Viewers at home, those who would later see the clip, would feel their stomachs not some in anger, some in anticipation. Because everyone knew that a response was coming, but it wasn't going to be another heated shout, another voice lost in the noise. No, Crockett's answer would land with the weight of truth sharpened by patience. And when it did, it would not just silence the room. It would expose the very lies, Comer thought, no one dared to call out. James Comer's command to stop talking wasn't born in isolation. For years, he had built a reputation on precisely that tactic, cutting others off, drowning them out, relying on volume and intimidation to secure the upper hand. It was a style that thrived in the chaos of hearings, where the loudest voice often grabbed the headlines. Comer knew the game. Shout first, control the soundbite, and leave your opponent rattled. For too long, it had worked. But across from him sat someone who represented an entirely different brand of leadership. Jasmine Crockett had no interest in matching decibels with decibels. She wasn't there to perform or to trade insults. Her power came from a calm that was unshakable, a stillness rooted in lived truth. Every pause, every measured word, carried the weight of someone who knew what it meant to be dismissed, underestimated, and mocked, and to survive it. That's why the stakes in this moment soared beyond a single congressional hearing. This was no longer about Comer trying to flex his authority in a chamber of microphones and cameras. It was about something much larger. The battle over who gets to define America's voice. Would it be those who shouted the loudest, twisting narratives until lies sounded like facts? Or would it be those who stood firm, refusing to let arrogance and intimidation dictate the truth? The air in the chamber carried that tension. Every observer could feel it. This wasn't just politics. It was theater with consequences. Comer's scream represented the old playbook: power through bluster, authority through interruption. Crockett's silence symbolized the new power through composure, authority through dignity. And when the two collided, only one would hold. Reporters scribbled in the margins of their notes, already sensing the gravity. Commentators watching from afar braced themselves. Because in the political battlefield of modern America, moments like these decide more than headlines. They decide whose story gets told, whose truth survives the noise. And Crockett wasn't just defending herself. She was standing for something bigger. For every community silenced by arrogance. Every citizen told their voice didn't count. Every truth twisted into a lie by those in power. Her calm wasn't passivity. It was resistance sharpened into poise. What unfolded in that chamber wasn't just another heated exchange. It was something deeper, something unforgettable. It was a reckoning. Live on national television, James Comer, didn't stumble into the spotlight. He fought, clawed, and shouted his way there. From the early days of his political career, he discovered something that would become his trademark weapon. The louder he was, the more attention he commanded. Where others might have built influence through coalition or quiet persuasion, Comer carved his niche through confrontation. He relished hearings not as platforms for discovery or dialogue, but as arenas for combat. His rise was not about listening, but about silencing. It was a strategy that paid dividends. Cameras loved him because chaos sells. His booming voice, his sharp interruptions, his relentless talking over colleagues they made for television drama, and Comer knew how to play it. He would seize the microphone, barrel past rules of decorum, and hammer away until his opponent faltered. If they dared to push back, he doubled down, escalating until the exchange became less about substance and more about survival. In a world where clips circulate faster than context, Comer's bluster became his brand, but underneath that swagger lay a troubling pattern. Over time, observers began to notice who his targets were. Time and again, Comer's aggression fell hardest on those least likely to be granted respect in the halls of power: women. People of color, immigrants, voices that carried histories of exclusion. He rarely trained his fury on the powerful men who mirrored him. Instead, his interruptions, his dismissals, his sneers were disproportionately reserved for those already forced to fight for their place at the table. For Comer, authority wasn't a tool of service. It was a weapon, and it was wielded with precision. Controversies followed him like shadows. He brushed off accusations of selective outrage, of hypocrisy, of ignoring facts when they didn't serve his narrative. He would dodge questions with a raised voice, shift blame with a wagging finger, and walk away from contradictions as though sheer confidence could erase them. Time and again, he proved that in his world, volume was truth and bluster was a shield. His defenders called it toughness. His critics saw it for what it was: arrogance dressed up as authority, and yet, for years, the strategy worked. Few had managed to puncture his armor. Many tried, but the sheer force of his interruptions left them drowned out. He embodied the politics of domination, where whoever speaks the loudest is assumed to be right. In a polarized America, Comer stood as a symbol of that style, one part showman, one part bully, and every bit convinced that no one could stop him. That arrogance followed him into every chamber, every committee hearing. It wasn't just a tactic, it was an identity. Comer expected deference, even obedience, from colleagues. He expected intimidation to be enough. He believed that the same old tricks, shouting, cutting off, sneering, would always silence the opposition. He had built his career on that assumption. But then came Jasmine Crockett. Her presence represented something Comer hadn't calculated for: calm that refused to be rattled. Where others met his volume with nervous defensiveness, she met it with stillness. Where others bent under the force of his interruptions, she held her ground with dignity. Crockett wasn't intimidated by the theatrics, and that unnerved him. His usual script, shout, dominate, and walk away victorious, began to fray, for all his years of bluster. Comer had never faced someone who turned his greatest weapon into his greatest weakness, because calm, deliberate truth has a way of cutting deeper than any scream. Crockett's silence wasn't weakness. It was a mirror, one that reflected Comer's arrogance back at him in real time. And in that hearing, with cameras rolling and America watching, his mask of invincibility began to crack, because even the loudest scream crumbles when calm truth cuts through. Asterisk. Jasmine Crockett did not arrive in Congress by accident, nor by inheritance, nor by the shortcuts so often afforded to the well-connected. Her path was carved through grit and service, through the kind of battles that rarely make headlines but define character. Before the nation knew her name, before cameras captured her composure under fire, she was an attorney in Texas who had chosen the hardest cases, the ones most others turned down. She didn't build a reputation on prestige clients or lucrative corporate contracts. She stood beside the voiceless, defending those who couldn't afford a polished legal team. She walked into courtrooms where the odds were stacked, where prosecutors counted on silence from the poor, the overlooked, the forgotten. And in those rooms, Jasmine learned a truth that would shape her forever: the power of staying calm when the world is screaming at you. It was there, amid the hostility of cross-examinations and the weight of lives hanging on verdicts, that she developed the skill that would one day disarm men like James Comer. Precision became her weapon. Resilience became her armor. She learned that every pause, every careful breath, could turn a courtroom from chaos into clarity. These weren't abstract lessons. They were survival. When she stepped onto the stage of politics, those lessons traveled with her. In Texas, she fought uphill battles as a woman of color in a statehouse not built for her presence. She faced dismissals, interruptions, the subtle and not-so-subtle attempts to remind her she didn't belong. And yet, she never let anger swallow her purpose. Instead, she mastered the art of using composure as defiance. She didn't need to shout to be heard. Her calm cut sharper than any outburst could. Her rise to Congress was more than a personal victory. It was symbolic. She represented a lineage of voices historically mocked, dismissed, or erased. Every time she took her seat in a hearing room, she carried with her generations who had been told to stay quiet, to wait their turn, to accept less. Her stillness was not passivity. It was power accumulated through history. Crockett understood something her adversaries often didn't: silence, when wielded with intention, can speak louder than a scream. She knew how to make a pause land heavier than a rant, how to let arrogance expose itself in the echo of its own noise. And in Congress, where bluster is currency, her refusal to play that game made her stand out. Reporters began to notice. Clips of her responses spread across social media, celebrated not for fiery outbursts, but for her surgical precision. Where others shouted over her, she waited. Where others spewed half-truths, she calmly laid down facts. It wasn't flashy. It was devastating. And in a political arena, addicted to theatrics, Crockett reminded audiences that there was another kind of strength. One born not from volume but from conviction. Her colleagues knew it too. Allies saw in her a new model of leadership, one that didn't mimic the arrogance of the loudest voices, but transcended them. Opponents, though they wouldn't admit it, began to hesitate when she took the microphone. She had a way of disarming attacks not by raising her voice, but by grounding it so firmly in truth that every interruption looked desperate by comparison. For Crockett, every hearing wasn't just about policy. It was about dignity. She understood that her presence itself was a statement, a woman of color, unshaken in spaces that once excluded people like her. Every calm response was an echo of survival, living testimony that composure could outlast mockery, that dignity could outshine arrogance. And yet, for all her calm, there was fire beneath the surface. Not a reckless flame, but a controlled burn, the fire of someone who knows injustice intimately and refuses to let it stand unchallenged. That fire drove her through late nights studying cases as an attorney. It fueled her campaigns, where she connected not with elite donors, but with ordinary people who saw in her someone who understood their struggles. And it propelled her into the chambers of Congress, ready to face down the bluster of men like Comer. In her audiences, saw not just a politician, but a mirror. They saw their own experiences of being talked over, dismissed, underestimated. They felt validated watching her hold her ground without flinching, without surrendering her calm. She was proof that survival could be transformed into strength, and that strength could become leadership. Every pause she took in a hearing carried the weight of generations, the mothers, the grandmothers, the workers, the activists who had endured mockery and kept going. Every measured word was rooted in lived resilience. And it was precisely that resilience that made her dangerous to men like James Comer. His power relied on intimidation, because when arrogance meets calm, arrogance cracks. And when mockery meets dignity, dignity wins. Jasmine Crockett's story was not just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been told to sit down, to be quiet, to know their place. It was about showing that truth, delivered steadily, could topple the loudest lie. And that strength was about to meet Comer's scream, head dash on. The chamber was tense. But it was Comer who snapped first. His voice ricocheted across the marble walls like a gavel slammed in anger. Louder than the chairman's, louder than any reasoned point could ever be. "Stop talking," he bellowed, his fingers stabbing the air as if sheer volume could erase everything Crockett represented. Reporters jolted in their seats, his pen scratching furiously. Cameras adjusted their focus, zooming in on Comer's red face, the veins straining on his neck, the spit catching in the corners of his mouth. This wasn't just passion. It was rage. WEAPON. IZED. And yet Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She didn't even raise an eyebrow. She simply sat, her stillness a deliberate refusal to dance to his chaos. That silence burned hotter than any retort. Comer kept going, his voice rising with each repetition. So shouting the same phrase again and again could somehow transform it into truth. "Stop talking. Stop talking." The words lost meaning, collapsing into noise, but Crockett's calm made his fury look small. Every second she stayed quiet widened the gap between them, arrogance unraveling against composure, Eldiga bluster bouncing off dignity. The spectacle became uncomfortable to watch. Some staffers exchanged uneasy glances. Others smirked, as if enjoying the show, siding with Comer's theatrics. But many in the room, especially those who had lived through their own experiences of being shouted down, leaned forward in tense anticipation. They weren't just waiting for Crockett to respond. They were waiting for the moment that would flip the script. For Comer, that silence was intolerable. He thrived on reactions, on sparring, on dragging his opponents into a mud pit where volume and aggression mattered more than substance. Yet here he was, shouting into a void. Crockett's restraint denied him oxygen. His aggression looked less like dominance and more like desperation. The hearing, meant to project order and oversight, now resembled a theater of raw power, one man yelling himself hoarse, and one woman refusing to break. Comer's face shifted from fury to smugness. Convinced his interruption had succeeded in cutting her down, he leaned back in his chair, a smirk settling onto his lips, as though he had proven his point, as though silence equaled surrender. But he didn't understand the depth of Crockett's stillness. It wasn't retreat. It was preparation. The chamber itself seemed to hold its breath. Was this the end of her statement? Had he shut her down? Or was something else about to happen? The smirks, the gasps, the scribbling of reporters all collided into a moment of unbearable anticipation. Because everyone sensed it now, Crockett's silence wasn't weakness. It was suspense. And suspense is always followed by a reveal. Then, just as Comer leaned back in smug satisfaction, Jasmine Crockett finally answered. Asterisk the smirk on Comer's face lingered, but it was about to vanish. Jasmine Crockett finally spoke. Her voice, low and even, cut through the tension like a scalpel through fabric. Not loud, not rushed deliberate. The first sentence landed so softly that, for a moment, it seemed she was speaking only to him. But the microphones carried every syllable across the chamber, across the cameras, across the nation. "Senator," she began, steady as stone, "you can shout as much as you want. But shouting doesn't erase the truth." The words fell into the silence Comer's rage had created. They echoed like a gavel of their own. Gasps fluttered across the audience benches. Reporters lifted their heads from notepads. The clip was already writing itself. Crockett didn't rush. She didn't need to. She laid out her reply, piece by piece, weaving together facts, history, and lived truth. She spoke of her career as an attorney, of the countless times she had been shouted over in courtrooms, and yet had won cases not by yelling, but by grounding herself in the law. She invoked history of the women and men who had been mocked, silenced, underestimated, and yet had become the backbone of America's progress. Every time someone like you tells someone like me to stop talking, she said, her eyes fixed on him. What you're really afraid of is that we will not stop being heard. The chamber was silent except for the click of cameras. Each sentence Crockett delivered felt heavier precisely because she refused to raise her voice. Calm became its own kind of thunder. Comer shifted uncomfortably, leaning forward now, trying to regain ground. He muttered a protest, raising his hand as though his authority could interrupt her cadence. "That's not," he started. But his interjection only highlighted the contrast. Crockett didn't pause for him. She kept going, her words steady, uninterrupted, the rhythm of truth drowning out his noise. The microphones caught his attempted interruptions, but they were swallowed under the weight of her calm delivery. For once, his shouting wasn't the headline. Her stillness was. Crockett reframed his outburst not as strength, but as proof of weakness. "When facts fail, people scream," she said. "When dignity threatens power, power lashes out. But dignity doesn't break." The line landed like a hammer. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a reframing of the entire moment. Cummer's scream had been reduced to a symptom, an involuntary crack in the mask of authority. She moved seamlessly to evidence. Citing Cummer's pattern of selective outrage, the contradictions in his record, the moments when his bluster concealed thin arguments, without raising her tone, she dismantled him. With each example, the smirk faded further from his face. His eyes darted toward allies in the room, looking for affirmation, but they offered none. The hearing, once his stage had shifted. Now the spotlight was squarely on Crockett. Comer tried again to cut in. It's louder this time, but his voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. "That's not accurate." But again Crockett didn't acknowledge him. Her calm became a shield, and every attempt to pierce it only made him look smaller. And then came the line that sealed it. "You can try to silence me, but you cannot silence the truth. And the truth is, your anger tonight is not about myths, about the lies you fear being exposed." The room reacted. Instantly gasps, scribbles, a few muffled chuckles. The kind of reaction that always signals a viral moment has just been born. Cummer's composure cracked fully now. His face reddened deeper than before, his jaw tightening, hands gripping the desk. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was caught between fury and speechlessness. And in politics, silence is sometimes the loudest defeat of all. Crockett, still calm, allowed the silence to linger. She leaned back slightly, not triumphantly, not smugly, but with the quiet assurance of someone who knows she has said exactly what needed to be said. The image was unmistakable. One man shouting until his voice broke, and one woman speaking softly until the truth broke him. By the time Crockett finished, Camara wasn't the commanding figure who had barked, "Stop talking." Minutes earlier, he was cornered, exposed, stripped of the aura he thought his bluster provided. His only move left was the one every wounded ego reaches for when the battle is already lost. Abruptly, with cameras rolling, James Cummer shoved back his chair. The legs scraped across the floor, loud and harsh against the stillness. Without a word, without looking back, he walked out of the chamber. Red-faced and trembling with frustration, the room erupted not in applause, but in an audible release of shock. Reporters whispered furiously. Staffers exchanged glances, and the cameras locked onto his empty chair. And Crockett. She remained seated, composed, still, the very image of dignity. That was the clip. That was the moment. Not his scream, not his rage, not even his exit, but her unshakable calm. But the story wasn't over. Because while Cummer's walkout was the headline in that chamber, something much bigger was already brewing. The real explosion wasn't in that chamber, it was about to detonate across America. Asterisk, it began within seconds of Cummer's red-faced exit. Phones in the chamber lit up. Reporters firing off tweets before the sound of his chair scraping across the floor had even faded. By the time he reached the hallway, hashtags were already climbing into trending territory. #Crockett.com. #CummerMeltdown. The internet had found its storyline, and it wasn't the one Cummer thought he'd written. Clips spread like wildfire. On TikTok, users remixed the moment with slow-motion effects. Dramatic soundtracks and captions like, "When your professor yells but you still ace the test." Others paired Crockett's calm response with the iconic mic drop sound effect. One edit froze Cummer mid-yell and overlaid Crockett's words in bold text. "When facts fail, people scream." Memes followed, fast and merciless. Images of Cummer walking out were spliced with captions. When Uno reverse hits harder than expected, one viral meme showed him edited into a video game cutscene, labeled Defeated Boss. Meanwhile, Crockett still framed calm, composed. Eyes steady, was exalted as a new symbol of poise under fire. Late-night hosts wasted no time. By evening, the moment was replayed across monologues. One comedian mimicked Cummer's shout, then leaned back and whispered Crockett's line, earning roars of laughter from the studio audience. Another joked, "Imagine thinking yelling, 'Stop talking,' works against a trial lawyer who's built her career out of not stopping talking." The punchlines kept coming, but beneath them lay a growing recognition. Crockett had turned what could have been just another shouting match into a cultural moment. Analysts weighed in too. On cable panels, pundits debated not the policy at hand, but the symbolism. One called it the embodiment of dignity versus chaos. Another framed it as a masterclass in the difference between noise and truth. Across the spectrum, the consensus was clear. Crockett's calm didn't just expose. Commerette redefined the power dynamic in real time. Social media users from every walk of life chimed in. Teachers shared the clip, writing, "This is how you handle classroom disruptions." Immigrant parents posted with pride, saying, "This is how we raised our children to face insult with dignity." Young activists flooded timelines, calling it a lesson in resilience. Proof that silence and composure could topple arrogance. Even celebrities amplified the moment. Musicians, actors, athletes' voices that usually stayed out of congressional drama tweeted the clip with simple captions. Iconic, Queen energy. That's leadership. The virality was no accident. It was a collective recognition that the exchange symbolized something larger than politics. Meanwhile, Cummer's defenders tried to spin. Some claimed he had been provoked. Others insisted his walkout was strategic. But their explanations only fueled the mockery, clipped and stitched into new memes, each one drowning his narrative deeper beneath Crockett's calm reply by the next morning. Major outlets weren't leading with the details of the hearing, they were leading with the confrontation. Headlines blared. Cummer walks out after Crockett's.com response, and when dignity defeats the scream. In classrooms, office break rooms, and dinner tables, the story replayed. Parents told their kids, "See? That's why you don't let bullies shake you." Professors cited it as an example of rhetorical strength. Churches folded it into sermons about truth standing taller than arrogance. The cultural ripple effect was undeniable. What had begun as an outburst in a committee room had become a parable, a story retold across platforms, languages, and communities. Crockett's calm wasn't just praised. It was studied, shared, immortalized. But as the laughter grew louder, as the memes multiplied, as the hashtags cemented themselves into the week's discourse, a quieter question began to echo beneath it all. Because this wasn't just about a man yelling and a woman responding. It wasn't just about virality or comedy. It was about something deeper, something that reached beyond the screen. And that question lingered like a whisper cutting through the noise. What does America really want its voice to sound like? Yet beneath the laughter and applause, a deeper question began to stir. Asterisk, when the dust settled and the memes slowed, Jasmine Crockett's words rang louder than Cummer's screams ever could. For her, this was never about theatrics or scoring a viral win. It was about something deeper, something enduring. She made that clear in the quiet clarity of her reflection. It was never about humiliating him. It was about proving that shouting isn't the same as truth. Those words cut through the noise because they weren't crafted for a soundbite. They were born from lived experience, the understanding that, in America, Volume 2 often tries to masquerade as authority. Cummer had leaned on that assumption, banking on intimidation to silence her. Instead, she had shown that composure, not chaos, is the truest form of power. The lesson resonated far beyond the chamber. Crockett embodied the idea that democracy doesn't survive on the loudest voice in the room. It survives on the strongest commitment to truth and dignity. She became a mirror for countless Americans who had been told to sit down, to stop talking, to accept dismissal. Her response was their answer too, calm, steady, unbroken. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. On one side, Cummer's chaos, Fred-faced, shouting, desperate to maintain control through sheer decibels. On the other, Crockett's composure, every pause, deliberate, every phrase measured, every truth undeniable. His scream had been loud, yes, but fleeting. Her reply was quiet, but eternal, and so the emotional crescendo built itself, not in fireworks, but in reflection. Screams fade. Dignity endures. That line became a refrain, quoted in op-eds, shared across social feeds, printed on protest signs. It distilled the moment into a truth that could not be mocked away, in the contest between arrogance and dignity. History remembers the latter, but this was more than a personal victory. It was a symbolic one. Crockett's response became an emblem of how democracy resists intimidation. She demonstrated that when power tries to enforce silence through aggression, resilience can flip the script. Her calm didn't just expose Cummer, it reaffirmed a broader principle. America's strength lies in its ability to endure insult without losing truth, for many. It was a reminder that composure is not weakness. It's discipline. That silence is not surrender. It's strategy. And that calm in the face of rage is not passivity's resistance. Crockett's reply was proof that the most powerful rebuttal to noise is not more noise, but clarity. And so across living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces, viewers didn't just cheer her, they absorbed her. Teachers replayed her response for students learning about rhetoric. Parents shared it with children as an example of dignity under pressure. Activists saw it as a roadmap for confronting injustice without becoming consumed by it. In that way, the moment transcended politics. It became a parable, a story about what kind of voice America chooses to elevate. Not the scream of arrogance, but the calm of conviction. Not the bluster of intimidation, but the stillness of dignity. And as millions replayed the clip, shared the quotes, and felt that surge of validation in their own hearts, one question lingered, sharper and more urgent than any meme could capture: who truly defines America's voice? From the very first scream to the final calm reply, this clash told a story bigger than any single hearing. Cummer screamed. Crockett endured. And America witnessed the truth. In that chamber, one man tried to weaponize volume as power. One woman chose dignity instead, and in the end, it was her voice that carried. If you felt that surge of justice while watching, you weren't alone. Millions across the country replayed the moment, nodded in pride, and whispered to themselves, yes, that's what strength looks like. Because this wasn't just politics. It was a living reminder that arrogance may shout, but it never wins. That's why we're here to highlight these moments, to honor the voices that refuse to be silenced, and to remind each other that truth, dignity, and resilience are stronger than bluster. If this story moved you, if it gave you a spark of pride, don't let it stop here. Join the movement. Subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to feel that reminder today. Add your voice to the growing chorus that believes America deserves better than red-faced tirades, because this wasn't just a clash. It was a message, a warning to those who think intimidation defines leadership, and a promise to those who know better. Crockett's calm wasn't just her strength. It was a reflection of all of us who've been told to sit down, to stop talking, to let arrogance have the last word. Not anymore, because this moment, this story is proof of what America's voice truly sounds like: steady, unshaken, undeniable, and it's only getting louder.